Good evening and welcome to another Otterbein Debate. Tonight we are looking at the issue of whether or not athletes, college athletes, should be paid. Answering that question in the affirmative, yes, they should be paid, is our junior political science major, Labra Hernandez. And arguing against that topic is our senior history major, Novak. Our judges for the evening are Chair of the Health and Sports Sciences Department, Joan Rocks, Instructor of Public Relations in the Communication Department, Dan Steinberg, and the Vice President for Student Affairs, Bob Gaddy. We also have two student judges, a junior journalism and media communication major, Gabrielle Lee, and a communication studies junior, Jacob Brandwine. The format for the debate tonight, each debater will be given a 6-minute constructive speech supporting their side of the debate, followed by 2 minutes of cross-examination by the other debater. They will then have a 3-minute rebuttal speech each, and then the debate will end with the affirmative giving us a 1-minute summary speech. Debaters, are you ready? We'll begin.
The question we are trying to resolve today is whether or not college athletes that play in Division I and Division II schools should get paid or not. The answer is they should. The NCAA regulation for not paying athletes is maintaining amateurism is crucial to preserving the academic environment in which acquiring a quality education is a first priority. In collegiate model of sports, the young men and women competing in the field or court are students first and athletes second. They should be paid for 3 reasons. 1, the NCAA exploits athletes in order to make billions of dollars. 2, they have limits on employment options because of NCAA regulations and time management. And 3, the NCAA violates the Sherman Antitrust Act that was embedded by Congress to stop big corporations from becoming monopolies. For these 3 reasons, college athletes that play in Division I and Division II schools should be getting paid when the NCAA uses them to make a profit. 1, the exploitation of players. While players are being used and abused, the NCAA is making billions of dollars off of them. Out of all the money the NCAA is making from the promotions and the athletes aren't seeing a penny. According to the Washington Post, the NCAA makes about $11 billion annually in revenue because of these athletes. Everyone in sports industry gets paid but the laborer. I thought we ended slavery years ago. Guess there's still forms going on, and worse, we praise the players and the teams. Coaches are making millions of dollars to verbally abuse student athletes. Nick Saban, the Alabama football coach, makes a salary of $7.1 million. Jim Harbaugh from Michigan makes $7 million. Urban Meyer from Ohio State makes $5.8 million. And these are only a few examples, and yet you're going to tell me that there isn't enough money to pay the players that are actually making all this money? The NCAA made $702 million from the agreement with CBS and Turner Broadcasting. This was in 2013 according to the NCAA website. That is, 81% of its revenues coming from media rights. And with their 14-year agreement, they're making $10.8 billion. And you're going to tell me that, again, the NCAA doesn't have money to pay these athletes? The Super Bowl in 2016 made $620 million in revenue according to Forbes.com. These are professional paid athletes that only brought in $620 million. That is $82 million less than the NCAA broadcasting revenue, not even their entire revenue. But again, the NCAA can't pay college athletes because they're amateurs. All the revenue that they're making does not make them amateurs. I would say it makes them pro athletes and that they should be getting paid for the hard work and time they're putting into their sport. 2, the limits on employment. According to the NCAA website, there are 176,000 student athletes from 346 different colleges and universities. But out of all of these athletes, only 56% of them receive some level of academic aid, and of these athletes, as of 2014, the graduation success rate is 83%. But these numbers aren't as pretty as they seem. For D1 schools, the overall federal graduation rate for male basketball and football is less than 50%, according to the NCAA website. The only reason that these numbers are so high is because of women's golf and swim teams, which have a 100% federal graduation rate. So in all reality, the students that are putting forth and making the most money and revenue for the NCAA does not actually have a good graduation rate, which makes you stop and think why. It could be because they didn't have the money to stay in school, take into account they didn't receive a full scholarship, they're not allowed to self-promote and make money because of NCAA regulations, and if they did have a job, they would not be able to manage 40 plus hours a week on their sport, manage classes, and go to work. It's too much strain on just one person who is learning to become and participate as a model citizen in the United States. And 3, it violates the Sherman Antitrust Act. The Sherman Antitrust Act is a landmark federal statute in the history of the United States antitrust or competition law, which was passed by Congress in 1890. The point of the Sherman Antitrust Act was to encourage business growth without companies trying to monopolize. The U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals decided to uphold the lower court rulings that the NCAA violated the antitrust laws with its rules limiting that athletes can receive while playing a sport in college. A federal judge even decided that athletes should be paid up to $5,000 in a deferred compensation for their name, image, and likeliness, since some of these are the main causes for the NCAA to get its revenue. My plan, I propose that athletes in Division I and Division II schools of NCAA sports team gets 2% of the revenue made by them playing the specific sport, and then divided evenly between all the athletes who are a part of the team. Meaning that if the NCAA makes $1 million off of men's basketball, 2% of that would be $20,000, which would go directly towards the school. And if there were 20 players, each player would make $1,000 by the end of the season or year. Each school who participated in D1 and D2 schools would receive 2% of the total makings of the NCAA revenue. Since D3 schools are not allowed to give out athletic scholarships because of how large the size of the programs are, they would now be able to give athletes athletic scholarships to grant fairness throughout all college athletes. The solvency. Since players would be getting paid, they would no longer be exploited, would be able to have some form of income coming in, and they would be able to provide for their families and finish school and better themselves in the long run. By paying college athletes when their image, likeliness is being used, it would save the NCAA millions of dollars in attorney fees, since in July 2015, the NCAA had to pay $44.4 million in attorney fees and another $1.5 million in cost of lawyers. The Otterbein class action antitrust lawsuit. This money could be better used in paying athletes who are being exploited by this monopoly. Also, these are only a few reasons why college athletes should be getting paid. The NCAA makes millions of dollars in the Super Bowl, but because college athletes are amateurs, this billion-dollar monopolized corporation takes advantage of that and decides not to pay them, just so they can continue to profit and exploit these innocent, broke college athletes. So I encourage you to vote for my plan and help all these athletes that are being exploited by billion-dollar corporations. You stand up.
So when you talk about revenue distribution for of 2% to the sports teams that are drawing the revenue, don't you think that only benefits athletes who participate in sports that actually generate high levels of revenue?
Yes.
So why should only sports that generate higher levels of revenue be paid while other students don't?
Because if we pay everyone, it would just ruin the entire economy for the NCAA and for colleges if we pay every single student. So we're only going to pay the ones that are actually making revenue to stop these huge corporations from taking all of the money from them.
That just sounds like you're making more of a business out of it. So only pay the ones that make money, not the ones that don't, because they don't make because they're not drawing as much revenue. Doesn't that just sound like it would only corporatize them more?
No, because these big corporations wouldn't keep all of this money. They would actually go to the people who are putting in forth the labor and the hours to actually make such a huge revenue.
Do you think that the money that's currently being generated doesn't get put back to the schools?
I think it does, but I feel like it should be put forth towards the athletes that are actually causing this huge revenue. So So like that, the players that are actually playing, that are putting forth 43 hours a week, as opposed to it going to coaches who make millions of dollars for yelling and screaming at their athletes.
So players who play for teams that draw money deserve to be paid, but athletes who put in just as much time and effort for sports that don't generate as much revenue don't deserve to be paid, even though they put in just as much effort.
I mean, we could always expand the plan, but these are just small steps to stop big corporations.
All right. While I agree that there are fundamental problems to the college tuition system, I don't think that paying student athletes will solve this problem, and in many aspects, it would only make things worse. To start, paying student athletes would deteriorate the system of values that our collegiate institutions are supposed to uphold. When one's applying for college and making the decision about what school to go to, there are obviously concerns of tuition costs, scholarship opportunities, and stipends, but these are not the only factors that prospective students consider when making their decision about what school to attend. By creating a market for student athletes, the role that athletics have in academic institutions will be dissolved to nothing more than a business operation, where student athletes accept offers from the schools that offer them the most compensation for their athletic abilities, and collegiate institutions compete for the best athletes in the hopes of getting a return on their investment so they can have a stronger recruiting class in the following year. Student athletes in academic institutions should not be dictated by traditional market values, but should continue to be centered around the moral and academic values that they have traditionally followed. By creating a market for student athletes, these traditional values will be completely undermined, and our academic institutions will suffer as a result. Branching off of this idea, there's no reason why potential student athletes could not go professional in their respective sports, so long as they were athletically gifted enough. While the NFL and the NBA do not allow high school athletes to join their leagues immediately out of high school and have 3-year and 1-year waiting periods respectively, there are options beyond these organizations if a person's sole purpose for participating in athletics were for economic gain. For example, Brandon Jennings was the #1 basketball prospect in his 2008 high school graduating class, and rather than attend college before entering the NBA, he opted to sign with an Italian professional team in Rome, where he was paid $1.2 million for a 1-year contract. After that season, he was drafted number 10 overall in the NBA draft by the Milwaukee Bucks. And the same options exist for potential NFL players who can opt out of playing in college and instead go to the Canadian Football League, which also doesn't have the same age requirements that prevent them from playing professionally in the United States. While some athletes are unable to go professional right out of high school, there are still other options that exist for them if being paid is their ultimate goal. However, the purpose of academic institutions has not been, and it should not be, to pay student athletes to play. While student athletes are not offered paid salaries or wages by their academic institutions or the NCAA, they're still compensated in ways that their peers are unable to be. 56% of NCAA student athletes were given athletic scholarships in order to decrease the financial burden of attending college, on top of being eligible for scholarships that are open to all students. In addition to that, they have access to high-level facilities and trainers and coaches that other students do not have the ability to receive. By awarding athletic scholarships to student athletes, academic institutions make college more affordable and accessible to many students who would otherwise be unable to attend those institutions. If we were to operate in a system that paid the very best athletes extraordinarily more than their teammates, or certain athletic programs more than other athletic teams, then it would directly limit the accessibility of college to student athletes who rely on funding from their academic institutions. To go to a court decision that has already talked about the antitrust violations that you referred to, in 2014, in the case O'Bannon versus the NCAA, the court eliminated the problems that existed that they found violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. The problems that they saw with the model that was happening was advertising for jersey sales and for video games, and they're no longer allowed to do that, and so they have solved that problem. And additionally, they decided to award more money for athletic scholarships because of that. While the NCAA is being portrayed as a corrupt organization because it generates a high amount of revenue, It shouldn't be viewed that way. 96% of the revenue that it generates are returned to its member schools. This allows for schools to award more athletic scholarships that students rely on, as well as fund the equipment, stadiums, and other facilities necessary to operate the teams. While most people assume that college athletic programs are inherently profitable, there's only 8 universities that reported turning a profit from their athletic departments between the years of 2005 and 2009. I do believe that athletes deserve more compensation for their work on the field, especially since they are unable to work jobs oftentimes because of the commitment that they make to their athletic programs and to school. But paying student athletes a salary or a wage is not the way to solve this problem, and in fact, it would create more problems along the way. I believe that all student athletes should have access to athletic scholarships, including Division III athletes, but paying them a wage or a salary will not help the current situation, and I believe that extending scholarships and stipends would be a much better solution than paying wages.
So are schools going to start to take away their academic standards if we start paying athletes?
I think that if we started paying athletes, it would deteriorate the academic value of some collegiate institutions, because if the sole purpose of athletic departments becomes to generate high levels of revenue, to have stronger recruiting classes the next year and continue to make more money, then that I think will inherently decrease the academic standards that go along with recruitment generally.
Isn't competition good, beneficial in some ways?
I don't see how the current model decreases competition. I still think that there's plenty of competition to get into better schools or things like that. But what we don't want is to have a system that benefits only a few athletic programs and not everybody else. I think that this would concentrate the power that certain athletic programs would have over others based on how much money they generate.
Do you think it's okay that less than 50% of basketball and football players are actually graduating from these schools?
I think it's a misleading statistic because a lot of those players opt out while they're in college, because then they're able to go professional while they're in college. So because basketball players have to go to college for at least 1 year, they choose to enter the draft while they would still be in college. I don't think it's because they're not succeeding in school or things like that. It's generally because they are able to go professional.
Do you know how many actually do go pro?
A small amount of athletes go pro, and that's why I don't think we should treat them like professionals and pay them.
All right, thank you. Athletes should be getting paid. Less than 50% of basketball and football players are actually graduating, since not all of them receive full scholarships and do not have time to work. They have to drop out because they cannot support themselves financially. How do we expect athletes to invest 40+ hours a week and go to class without them being able to feed themselves? Ole Miss quarterback Bo Wallace said that a lot of guys go to bed hungry at night because they don't have the money to eat. This is only one of many examples of players not having money to eat. Knowing that they do not have money to feed themselves and actually live, they are still expected to give 100% in their sport. Just seems morally wrong. And we cannot pay them because they are amateurs. They should at least have money to be able to feed themselves. Scholarships are great, yes, but that money is not accessible to students. It is not money in hand for students to use things they need, like food, which defeats the purpose of my plan. What this gets is students from lower income families, which is the majority of student athletes, the money in hand to feed themselves. And it gives 100% to give 100% into their sport and receive the education they came to college to begin with. While D3 schools would get scholarships, giving them the opportunities they did not have before. The high school students who are leaving the country, those who are talented enough to go to another country to get paid, to play will go regardless, especially for monetary reasons. But my plan isn't addressing them. My plan is addressing the majority of student athletes who do stay in the country and go to college because they want to get the education while playing a sport in college. The NCAA is exploiting student athletes for wanting an education. If the NCAA really believes that student athletes are students first and athletes second, then my plan follows that precise goal. Thank you.
I do not believe that that student athletes are really struggling to eat. I don't think that's a very accurate an accurate statement. I don't think that they're going hungry. 56% of them are awarded scholarships that other people don't have access to. And the plan that's being presented does not help the majority of student athletes. It only helps those who generate revenue for their schools. So this plan is only going to help really basketball and football programs, which are the sports that traditionally bring in more money for the NCAA and for their schools. And I don't think that this is a plan that would really address the real issue, which is the cost of college tuition. I do think we should increase athletic scholarships and stipends, but having a system that pays wages, especially only as much as 2%, is really going to put much of a dent into those problems. I also think it's a really dangerous idea for us to turn student athletes into commodities. Student athletes should not be looked at as an investment opportunity for their athletic programs. That's not the values that universities have or the NCAA has, and by paying athletes, that's the type of system it will create. It turns them into a commodity, which is not what we want. Yes, we should be helping the student athletes, especially ones who come from impoverished families or who really need the help. But that's what athletic scholarships and stipends do. They help those people specifically. So I think that we should continue to increase the amount of athletic scholarships that we give students, but we should not be turning them into a commodity for profit.
College athletics is already a business. Players are still being exploited and abused by this billion-dollar corporation and their well-paid-off coaches. Student athletes go to college to get a better education. Not all of them go pro. And for those who don't, will still have a chance at succeeding out in the real world because of their college education and degree, thus making the students first and athletes second, which is in fact the NCAA's goal. So again, I encourage you to vote for my plan and help all these poor student athletes get paid. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Another round of applause, please, for our debaters. I want to take this moment to thank Otterbein TV for the coverage and for the Department of Communication for supporting us all these years. And I think debate is an incredibly worthwhile activity that probably deserves to be paid too, I think. Okay, I'm going to ask the judges now to make their decision. In front of them you have two cards. One is a picture of money, which would be a vote for paying college athletes, and the other is the Monopoly Moneybags man. That would be a vote against paying college athletes. So if you would hold up the card that you think, no. We have a 4-1 decision against paying college athletes. Sorry, athletes. Thank you, debaters, and thank you once again for joining us for this Otterbein debate.